Every day we live alongside evil, often unnoticed but always present, lurking in the background of everyday life. We see glimpses of it in the headlines, in cold statistics, and sometimes in the faces of those we'd never suspect. And sometimes evil takes the form of an unimaginable crime, one that shocks a community and scars it forever. Today, we're revisiting one such case, a tragedy that rocked a small American town and left behind more questions than answers. This is the case of the West Memphis Three. It was May 5th, 1993. The sun was shining in West Memphis, Arkansas. A typical day in a quiet town, nothing out of the ordinary. But by nightfall, the peace would be shattered. Three young boys, Stevie Branch, Christopher Byers, and Michael Moore, all just 8 years old, set out to play after school. They never came home. The boys were best friends. They had met in school and bonded over their time in the local Cub Scouts. That afternoon, Stevie left his home wearing blue jeans and a white shirt, riding off on his black and red bike. Christopher, the smallest of the group, wore a long-sleeved shirt and blue pants. He was sweet, quiet, and full of innocence. Michael, the natural leader, proudly wore his Boy Scout cap and uniform, even when it wasn't meeting day. He loved it that much. Their plan was simple: play in the nearby woods known as the Robin Hood Hills. It was a place familiar to them. But by evening, when they didn't return, panic set in. Christopher's stepfather began calling for him through the trees, but the forest echoed back only silence. By midnight, the families had reported the boys missing, and soon a desperate search began. Parents, neighbors, and police scouring every corner of the woods, but nothing was found, not a trace. Until the following afternoon. Around 1:45 p.m. on May 6th, a police officer spotted a child's shoe floating in a muddy creek. It was then that the nightmare truly began. Hidden in a shallow ditch, bound and bruised, were the bodies of the three missing boys. They had been tied hand to foot with their own shoelaces, left to drown, beaten, and discarded like trash. One child, Christopher, had suffered injuries that were far worse, including mutilation. The details were horrifying, and no one in town could make sense of what had happened. The investigation began immediately, but it was sloppy from the start. Officers handled the crime scene without proper procedure. Evidence was lost. Even the chief of police was seen smoking and throwing cigarette butts into the very ditch where the boys were found. The town wanted answers, fast. Soon, rumors began to spread. People started pointing fingers, and before long, the focus shifted to three teenage boys, Damien Echols, Jason Baldwin, and Jessie Misskelley Jr. They were different. They wore black, listened to heavy metal, and one of them, Damien, was known to be interested in paganism. That was all it took. In the middle of what became known as satanic panic across the U.S., the police claimed the murders were ritualistic, occult, evil, and they needed someone to blame. After hours of interrogation without a lawyer or his parents present, Jessie Misskelley, who had a documented intellectual disability, confessed. But his story didn't match the evidence, and he quickly recanted. Still, the damage was done. All three boys were arrested, and the trial became a national spectacle. There was no physical evidence tying them to the crime, no eyewitnesses, no motive, but the court leaned into the narrative, the black clothes, the metal music, the drawings on their bedroom walls. It was enough. Misskelley was sentenced to life plus 40 years. Jason Baldwin got life, and Damien Echols was sentenced to death. They were just teenagers. But as the years passed, people began to ask questions. Journalists, celebrities, even forensic experts started digging into the case, and the truth became harder and harder to ignore. Because DNA tests, new ones years later, revealed something shocking. There was no trace of the West Memphis 3 at the crime scene. But there was a hair, one that matched the stepfather of one of the victims. Despite all this, the state refused to admit wrongdoing. It would take nearly 20 years, a global campaign, and a legal loophole for the West Memphis 3 to finally walk free. They had lost their youth, their freedom, and for many, their names would forever be linked to a crime they insist they didn't commit. But the most haunting part of this case? The real killer, or killers, were never brought to justice. This brings us to the end of today's case. As always, I appreciate your support for my channel. Subscribe, like, and share this video for more. See you next time on Tale of True Crimes.